Let's split up.
That was what my husband said to me one day when he came home from work, and I responded, "All right then, fine, here's the document," and shoved the divorce file before his face without hesitation. He bore a surprised expression on his face as he stared back at me, who also donned a look of confusion. "You asked for a divorce, right? Here's the file. What are you waiting for?" My name is Madeline Sage. I'm 30 years old, and I'm a housewife. How I met my husband, Jack, isn't too much of a long story, and it all started at my job. Before I got married, I used to work full-time in a coffee shop, and Jack started to frequent that place. Later on, he confessed he had feelings for me and told me he fell in love with me the moment he saw me. He came almost every day, trying this thing on the menu and that, and sometimes staying a while to read a book or type on his laptop. Because he came so often, he talked a lot too, and slowly but surely, I grew infatuated with him too. I accepted him as my boyfriend, and we were together for 5 years, and then we decided to get married after he proposed to me. Barely a year's passed since we tied the knot. Jack is very calm, easygoing man who never got angry when I did something wrong. Nor did he ever complain about anything at all. He never expected anything from me, which is nice now, in the sense that I didn't have any pressure from him to do everything I did perfectly. He was pretty much the kind of person that didn't care much about things in general. At first, that made me feel a little lonely, and I wished he would give me more of his attention and more of his love. But as I mentioned, that isn't the case nowadays, and it's become more of a blessing given the situation. I was able to pursue my hobbies pretty actively, and I was granted the freedom to go places with my friends and my family. But he only had a single request.
I'd like you to become a housewife. You're a very attractive girl, Madeline, and I'm scared that someone else is gonna fall in love with you at first sight, just like I did.
And that was it. All he wanted from me was to be a housewife and take care of the home. Although I liked work, it wasn't like I really wanted to continue working, considering I also wanted to be at home and take care of my children one day. So I accepted his request and left my job. And from that day onward, I focused my energy on the housework and did what I could to take care of Jack and the home well. I made Jack breakfast every morning, and I also made him a loving wife's lunch. I gave him dinner every evening right after he walked in through the door. And I even did some research on recipes to make different dishes without repeating them until at least a month had passed. And he never failed to offer his gratitude about that. His thanks alone gave me so much motivation, and it made all the housework much less chores and much more fun pastime. Unfortunately, all married couples have their problems, and Jack and I were no exception. We have a single problem between the two of us that always been the elephant in the room to some extent. That problem was none other than Jack's mother, my mother-in-law, Mrs. Hodgkin. When we first met to ask for her blessing to get married, she seemed a very kind, caring woman, and I took a liking to her. When Jack and I were dating, we did so in the countryside suburbs of the city. But then, he was transferred to headquarters because of his marriage to me, so we moved downtown. And Jack's family home was located just outside the city center, where headquarters are. So we started to interact with his family a lot more often. Perhaps that was the sole reason why she started to barge into our apartment unannounced and start saying nasty things to me. And she did this every single day, like it was part of her schedule. "Look here, Madeline, this spot is still dirty." "Oh my goodness, how are you this bad at flavoring the food?" And those only make up the tip of the iceberg. She opens the fridge without asking for my permission, takes out the pickles that Jack loves, bites into one, and complains about how it tastes like cheese gone bad, or something equally nasty. But honestly, I think the fact that she opens the fridge without asking first is the bigger problem here. Jack told me, and I quote, "The pickles taste awesome, Mrs. Hodgkin." Want to know her response? His sense of taste's been ruined after 5 years of eating dog shit like this. This is all your fault. My son had the most exquisite taste for good food, and now that's destroyed. Look at what you've done to my darling. He used to say that any cooking other than my own wasn't right for him, and he wouldn't eat anything else. Well, it seems to me that that isn't the case anymore, Mrs. Hodgkin. He's been eating lots of things other than your cooking, and he seems to be getting along just fine. Must be because he let himself fall for a bitch the likes of you. Now that was painful. What the hell was she talking about? I know more than anyone that Jack is not the kind of person who said what he didn't think. I understood that Mrs. Hodgkin is very proud of her son. He was a straight A since middle school, was accepted into a prestigious university, and graduated summa cum laude. My children have never once done something that made me worry about them in their lives. They think a lot of me and their father, and I couldn't be more proud of anyone. Her bragging went on indefinitely, and it gave me the impression that the proudness she had for Jack had turned to overprotectiveness. She was constantly wanting the best for her son, and she would fight to get what he deserved. Perhaps that was why every day she refused to leave my home until Jack came back from work, claiming she could only be satisfied by seeing her son's face. She would then go home with a look of satisfaction, and the process would just rinse and repeat every single day. Jack was surprised to find his mother in his apartment during the first week or so, but because it had become such a daily axiomatic routine, he didn't seem to care anymore. The problem was that it was an enormous nuisance for me, but what was even more concerning and disturbing was this one sentence. "No grandchildren for me yet?" Those 5 singular words put together chilled me to the marrow, because it meant that someone was pressuring me to put myself through something that needs a lot of courage and physical strength. I didn't feel ready yet, but telling her that would mean inevitable doom. So I made the best excuse I could think of, and that would follow but the same damn session of bragging. My son is quite a prodigy, you see, and I want his genes to be passed on to my grandchildren. I'll talk to him about it, Mrs. Hodgkin. You are a woman until you bear a child after all, dear. Remember that. This pressure went on and on every single day. But I did talk to Jack about this once, about how his mother was barging inside without checking with either one of us beforehand, and saying some mean things to me, and also about having children. His response was pretty hopeless.
I actually don't like children very much. That's why I honestly don't want to have any, and I'm sorry for that.
It would be devastating for Mrs. Hodgkin, and I had a hunch that her abuse would intensify because she'd find some stupid train of logic that ultimately blamed me for making Jack think that way. Personally, whether the idea of having children was nice, I was always okay with the notion of never having any too. That's why I respected his wishes and didn't make any fuss of it. However, Mrs. Hodgkin just wouldn't stop pestering me about that subject, and my patience eventually grew thin. I went to talk to him again. That's when he took me completely by surprise by saying he was all for the idea of conceiving children. Perhaps his mother was pestering him about it too, so we tried, and tried, and tried. But, unfortunately, conceiving a child turned out to be easier said than done in our case. I was convinced the stress caused by Mrs. Hodgkin was the reason why I couldn't get pregnant. But regardless, as I predicted, her pestering kicked up a notch and pretty much became verbal abuse. I felt like I was slowly backing into a corner, with her and her arrogance providing no opportunity of escape.
Did you really quit being a damn woman? What did I tell you? I told you that a woman only becomes one after she bears a child, right?
If my patience had gotten thin last time, this time the stress was just about to burst. But then Jack did another half-decent thing and said,
Now, love, I'm pretty tired from trying to conceive a child, honey. So I'm going to tell Mom the truth.
And he kept his word and warned Mrs. Hodgkin not to bother him or me about this again. After he did, perhaps the shock of being spoken to sternly by her own son was too great for her to handle well. But her unexpected visits came to an abrupt end. Why hadn't I told my husband about her and her stupidity sooner? I thought I was finally free from her tyrannical clutches and could now live my life mostly free of unnecessary stress. 6 months later, however, another problem would arise. Something about Jack just didn't seem right. He'd always been a pretty quiet, go-with-the-flow kind of guy. But these days, he'd become even quieter and more serious. Instances when he would respond to me after I said something to him became rare. And I couldn't understand why, but whenever I went back home for an afternoon, he would say,
You're going home way too often these days. Don't you have something better to do?
He started to be pretty bossy about how I lived my life outside the house. I honestly thought things were going super well between us, with him giving me the freedom I wanted to do things I wanted to do. So you can imagine how hard it was for me to hear him interfere. Furthermore, I started to notice him saying more things that could be construed as psychological harassment.
You're still doing handwork? You do know that if you keep at it, you're going to get brain fog starting next year, don't you? Must be nice, though, being free enough to play with yarn all day, every day. Oh, I wish I could live a life as free as that.
His complaining quickly became a real nuisance. I felt my love for him started to lessen more and more with time. I once just wanted to let off some steam, so I said, Being a housewife is hard too, you know. I knew I'd made a mistake as soon as I said that. At that instant, Jack dawned on an expression I'd never seen on him before. Rage, and he started to shout.
And how do you, a mere housewife, expect to argue against me, a working man breaking his back to provide enough for the two of us? Who the hell pays for the food you put on my plate every night? Watch your tongue, woman.
He hurled his phone at the wall as he said so. Fortunately enough, both the wall and the phone were fine. But I was absolutely petrified seeing him do such a thing. But at least, it wasn't like he psychologically abused me directly, and I was personally all right. It was customary for him to go on a walk after we had an argument. It wasn't uncommon to find him asleep on the sofa the morning after he stormed out of the house. And my hopes that everything would be back to normal once he woke up were shattered when he went to completely ignore me until he left for work. I really have no idea why he has such ridiculous outbursts and what he hopes to achieve out of them. But I didn't want him to say something nasty to me again when I asked him the matter, so I refrained from speaking for some time afterwards. We went every morning together in silence until I would see him off to work. With Jack away, my home became a nice, quiet place without any stress at all. Being alone in the home for most of the day gave me lots of time to think things over, and I started to realize that maybe staying with him as his wife wouldn't do me any good in the long run. My spirit couldn't take much more. He'd almost destroyed his phone and created a hole in the wall after getting angry at me. As I was thinking about these sort of things one night, Jack came home from work as always and said without any warning,
Let's split up.
So many things happened in my head at once.
I don't think I can live the nice life I hope to have if I'm together with a woman like you.
That was the most condescending thing I'd ever heard. But fortunately, I was actually one step ahead of him. All right then, fine. Here's the document.
Huh? Wait, what? Huh?
Jack was so surprised to see me holding the very document that would officially end a marriage. His expression was quite priceless, actually. We're divorcing, right? No problem. I understand. And let's go through with it. I was pretty sure he thought I was going to collapse at my knees, become an emotional wreck, crawl to him, and beg for his forgiveness. Don't tell me you thought I was going to be like, no, please, I don't want to divorce you. I love you so much. I'll make changes around here, and I'll work harder to make you happy. Just please forgive me, and please give me another chance. That is what you were thinking, wasn't it?
No, not particularly.
I didn't think so. I know you wouldn't hope for bullshit like that. Like hell something as glorious as that would ever happen in real life to anyone. Jack hung his head and stared at the floor. Whether it was inflicted on people or not, it doesn't matter. I hate violence more than anything else in the world. Once someone becomes physical with anything because of rage and induces a sense of fear in me, my impression on that person immediately drops as fast as a Persian falcon dive-bombing a pigeon. And that does not exclude my husband. Ever since he started being physical with objects as the verbal abuse bombarded me, the love I once had for him had completely disappeared. That's why I'd just gone to City Hall to get the divorce document that day. I'd even filled in my section already. I was actually all packed up, ready to get the hell out of there and stay with my family, leaving the divorce document on the table, waiting for him. And that's when he walked in through the door, and the last thing I expected was for him to ask for a divorce. The very thing I was going to leave in my wake once I left. Nothing could have been more perfect for me.
So that's it then. We're divorcing?
What? Do you mean to tell me that you only suggested we divorce as a joke? But I know you well enough to know you would never do such a stupid thing.
I would never!
Once Jack let his pride take over, his fuse is shorter than a fingernail. That's why he quickly throws a tantrum as soon as I strike even the tiniest of nerves. Up until then, we'd been in a good relationship as husband and wife. So I never said anything that tainted his pride, and he in turn tried not to make things difficult for me. I still appreciate him for that, but the fact that we'd been living together for more than a year could have been the cause of him showing his true colors.
You're really okay with this, eh? You're all right with divorcing me, eh?
He was trembling with fury as he said so. But perhaps his pride hated the idea of adhering to my wishes instead of his own, because he then said,
Then I'm gonna fill this in now, okay? Now's your last chance to stop me.
His tone made it a threat, without a doubt, but my decision didn't change whatsoever. I ignored his question, and he went on to write his signature on the document.
So now we're officially done. Remember, that is what you wanted, and don't expect my help when you realize your stupid mistake.
Thank you, sir. I knew we could never go back to the old life we had together, so this is what I think is best for the both of us. I grabbed the document, placed it neatly inside my purse, picked up my luggage, and took refuge in my family's home. 1 month later, with the help of the lawyers, we started to discuss the division of property between Jack and I. So if we divide everything into equal parts, this is how much we each get.
But isn't that too little for me? What have you done during our marriage together than sit around at home and do stupid handcrafts? All I've ever done, on the other hand, is go to work to make enough for both of us to survive. I think I should get more than that, and you should get less. I don't think it's fair otherwise.
Yeah, too bad your wages were pretty pathetic in the first place. If you'd been more successful, we'd both be happy with these numbers right now. Is what I was going to say, but stopped myself. The last thing I wanted was another argument, and this one, it could be the one that ends up with him physically abusing me. My lawyer said that the law requires both parties receive exactly half of the joint estate to be considered division of property. That's probably the sole reason why Jack remained seated, calm, and composed. Also, I'd like you out of the apartment. Understood?
What the hell are you talking about? The house belongs to the man in the relationship, and that's me. Or do you mean you want to sell the apartment and split the money? It's true that the division of property doesn't amount to much of anything, does it? Even I know that much. But too bad for you, princess, because I'm going to live in that apartment whether you like it or not.
And what are you talking about, my good sir? You don't remember the apartment is under my name?
What the hell do you mean?
My dad is the owner of the apartment, and once he found out I was going to get married, he gave it to me to live in whenever I wanted. Should the need arise, I could even sell that apartment to get some money to help us out.
Oh shit, I forgot about that.
And it isn't eligible as an item on the list of property to divide, and that's why it's legitimately my apartment. And I already sold it to someone else, so I do hope you understand when I ask you to leave. Otherwise, I'll have to report to the authorities for illegal trespassing, I'm afraid.
But that would mean I wouldn't have a place to live. What do you expect me to do so suddenly?
You think I give a good goddamn about that? And it's not like I'm telling you to get the hell out right this minute. You could rent another place, or sleep a couple nights at hotels as you try to find a better place. The big belongings you have can stay for a short time, but I want them out by the end of the month.
But that's...
Is there a problem? Jack was hesitant for a moment, before he revealed something completely out of the blue that admittedly shocked me to my core.
I actually don't have a job right now.
What? It turns out that my husband had lost his job a couple months prior to all of this. Apparently, the reason his attitude made a complete 180 was because he felt like he lost his sense of purpose in the house because of his losing his job, causing him stress and emotional instability. And all that time he was at work was a lie. He was actually killing hours and hours in some park downtown, convincing me he was still working. What the hell can one do to kill 8 hours of time every single day for a couple of months? I asked why he left his job. His answer was that his colleagues was promoted to section manager, and his pride just couldn't accept that he couldn't get any promotion at all, no matter how hard he tried. He started to abuse his colleagues, and his reputation grew increasingly dark over time. He eventually started to believe some people were talking about him behind his back, and that sparked the first of his outbursts.
I know all of you are freaking talking shit about me in secret. I'll teach you to never cross me.
He threw a tantrum at work, after which was a summons from the department manager and a serious session of lecturing and scolding. His mistaken overreaction towards something that was never true tainted his image within the company all the more. And shame drove him to leave the company completely. I always knew he was a fellow with lots of pride, but I didn't think he could become this much of an abnormal asshole. So what you're saying is that you can't rent a room because you aren't working at the moment? And since you don't have money, you can't stay a few nights at a hotel?
That's right. That's why I need that apartment to stay for some time. I promise it won't be for long.
I can't do that, Jack, because I'm not the owner anymore. I'm sorry, but you're gonna have to find another place to live. You brought this whole mess on yourself after all, and you have to find a way to survive. I can only suggest you try to find another job, even a part-time one. Oh, wait, I have a better idea. How about you ask that overprotective mother of yours to take care of her poor sweet baby, who's all alone and unable to fend for himself anymore?
You know I despise my mother, right? She's so pesky. She meddles in other people's business, and she always tries to find out what I'm doing at any given time. That's why I was living in the countryside suburbs for a while. It was to get away from her.
But that's your only option now, isn't it?
It isn't if you help me. Come on, Madeline. Show some mercy here. Please. You're moving out of that apartment anyway. Why not let your old husband live there for some time? Until he gets back on his feet?
How many times do I have to tell you? I sold the apartment. It isn't mine anymore. I can't give you permission to live there because I'm not in charge of it anymore. The only advice I can give you about the apartment is to buy it if you want to live in it badly.
You know full well I don't have the friggin' money to buy a 30-inch plasma screen TV, let alone an apartment.
I don't care.
Please, Madeline, help me.
Too bad. All you can do is find an apartment to rent or go back home to your mother. Those are your only options. Well then, I bid you good day, Jack. And with that, my lawyer and I stood up and walked out of the room without uttering another word. It turns out he went back home to his mother later on. She flew into a rage and said, "You're a public disgrace, not having a job on top of divorcing your wife. You get yourself a job, right now."
If there was a job somewhere in this goddamn city, I would work there. Believe me.
Ugh! What a shame. What a shame. Such sessions of psychological abuse become an everyday thing, and that drove Jack insane. He just went ballistic one day and went on a hysteria spree, much like what he did when he was together with me. He threw objects at walls, furniture, and windows, breaking quite a few of these things, in addition to the verbal violence many times worse than what his mother ever said to him. Mrs. Hodgkin told Mr. Hodgkin what had happened, and as a result, Jack was evicted from his family's home with orders never to step inside it again. And now, he has nowhere to go, penniless and without a job. He reached out to me again, and his texts were so desperate, I admittedly considered helping him.
It's all over, Madeline. I'm finished. I might as well be dead. You're my only hope. Please, please, help me.
I forced my sympathetic spirit down into a void from which it can never affect me again in this situation, and responded, "Find your own hope," and blocked all calls and messages from him. He literally has nothing now. No home because his parents kicked him out, and he couldn't afford a single apartment, no money, and no one to look to for help. All he could do was to find a part-time job to make at least some money, and although his pride wouldn't allow it, he forced himself to apply for part-time jobs everywhere he could find. He managed to find a few, and he now apparently lives in an apartment so old and fragile, everyone was certain the building was built in the 19th century. Just the other day, I went to a convenience store to get some Band-Aids and found him working as a cashier. But it was a pitiful sight because someone younger than him, a junior, was scolding him all the while. His pride had been destroyed beyond all repair, and he found himself unable to fight for his dignity. I suppose this is a textbook example of what goes around comes around. As for me, since my divorce, I've been pursuing my handcrafting event more actively. Up until a few weeks ago, I'd been doing it as a hobby, but then I decided to try selling a few creations on an auction app. I made a decent amount of money. I made $150 with 3 creations. And nowadays, I'm creating my own budget by selling what I made at handmade crafts conventions and events. And every day is a bit of a busy day indeed. And I recently found a new man. Although Jack kind of made me skeptical of men in general, I figured that if I stayed too vigilant for too long, I would miss another chance at having a nice life together with someone. So I swallowed my fear and allowed the manager of a certain event take me once, then twice, and then many times more. And he's absolutely fantastic. I really do hope I'll be happy with him, but this time, I'm gonna make some changes. I'm doing well as a semi-independent craftswoman and as someone who enjoys a nice man's company. And I'm gonna make sure I don't lose either.